I reached over and habitually turned off the alarm clock 3 seconds before it was supposed to ring. 4 hours and 30 minutes in the morning. My internal clock worked with the precision of a chronometer, even at 76. Knotted fingers fumbled for my glasses on the bedside table. The world came into focus, though it was still dark in my cabin outside Moore. A huge shadow stirred at the foot of the bed. Neptune, a big red Maine Coon, stretched in a way that seemed to take up half the bedroom, then gracefully jumped to the floor. His feather-like tail swished from side to side. "Good morning, Neptune," I mumbled, kicking my feet off the bed. "Today is a big day. The data from the observatory should be in by 8. The cat purred as if realizing the significance of the event and headed for the door, clearly hinting at breakfast. I grinned. In this small house with 3 rooms and a veranda facing the woods, only Neptune understood me without words. I threw on an old plaid robe over my pajamas and shuffled into the tiny kitchen. I knew how to make exactly 3 dishes: scrambled eggs, oatmeal, and cheese on toast. Today was oatmeal day. The stove clicked on and the gas flame lit up the kitchen with a bluish light. Neptune jumped into a chair, watching my actions with an expression of scientific interest. "You know," I said, stirring my porridge, "today you and I can make a breakthrough in understanding the nature of dark matter. The observatory has been collecting data for 3 weeks at my request. If my hypothesis is correct, anomalies in the radiation background of quasars will confirm the new model." Neptune blinked his amber eyes and gave a long meow. "Yes, I'm worried too," I nodded, as if I'd heard the question. Breakfast passed in the usual silence. Neptune got his portion of premium food with turkey chunks, and I got a bowl of oatmeal with honey and a cup of strong tea. I never drank coffee. After 60, it gave me migraines, and mental clarity was too important for work. After breakfast was a daily ritual. I showered, carefully shaved my cheeks and chin, leaving only a neat gray mustache. I combed my thinning hair and put on a fresh shirt. I always worked in a shirt, even at home, even if no one but Neptune could appreciate it. "Math demands respect," I liked to repeat to my students when I was still teaching at the university. My office occupied the largest room in the house. The walls were hung with graphs and printouts of formulas, and on a massive oak desk stood a computer with 2 large monitors. No pictures of the family, just a portrait of Einstein and a picture of Stephen Hawking taken at a conference in Cambridge 20 years ago. Back then, young me had the honor of asking the great physicist a question and receiving an approving nod. I turned on my computer and, while the system booted up, walked over to the window. The sun was just beginning to rise over the treetops. I loved this moment, the wee hours of the morning, when the world was still asleep and my mind was working with maximum clarity. In the distance, I could see the first lights of Moore, the small town where I'd spent most of my life. Somewhere there, in an apartment on the 3rd floor of a brick building on Oak Street, lived my son Hugh and his wife, Tamsin, and their 2 children, 15-year-old George and 12-year-old Ashton. The computer hummed softly and I returned to the desk. Neptune had already settled into his favorite chair in the corner of the room. The usual morning work began, checking email, looking at the latest publications in scientific journals, adjusting calculations for the current article. That day, I was working on an article about quantum fluctuations in the superdense regions of outer space. The theory I had been developing for the past 3 years suggested that dark matter could affect the quantum entanglement of elementary particles in a special way. If my calculations were correct, this could explain some of the anomalies observed in galactic clusters. I sat piled up with formula printouts and methodically transferred the data into tables. My mind was completely immersed in the work, and time ceased to exist. Only Neptune, who meowed demandingly around noon, reminded me that it was time to take a break. "Sorry, friend." I rubbed my eyes under my glasses. I'd forgotten the time again. Lunch was as simple as breakfast: reheated soup from yesterday's supplies and a cheese sandwich. As I ate, I continued to think about my work. The more I immersed myself in the calculations, the more I felt that I was on the verge of a significant discovery. My theory didn't just explain observed phenomena, it predicted new ones that could be tested experimentally. After lunch, I went back to work. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the silence of the house was broken by a telephone call. The old landline trilled, causing Neptune to twitch his ear in frustration. "Professor Aldrich here," I answered it habitually, though I had been retired for 5 years. "Dad, it's Hugh." The voice in the receiver sounded a little impatient. "Did you remember Sunday?" I frowned, trying to remember what it was about. "Sunday? Tamsin's birthday." I could hear the irritation in his voice. "We talked about it 2 weeks ago. Family dinner at 2 o'clock. "Oh yes, of course," I nodded, though I had no recollection of that conversation. "I'll be there. And please don't come in your old jacket." Tamsin had invited a couple of her co-workers. I cringed. Tamsin worked as a supermarket manager and seemed to consider it the pinnacle of career success. Although she'd started out as a simple market clerk in her village, she now emphasized at every opportunity that she earned more than her retired professor father-in-law. "All right, Hugh. I'll dress appropriately," I replied dryly. His voice had changed slightly, and there was a begging tone in it. "Could you bring that bottle of whiskey you got for your last birthday? You don't drink anyway." I sighed. It was a gift from my former graduate student Patrick, now a professor at Oxford, a rare single malt from the Orkney Islands. "Okay, I'll bring it back," I agreed. "Great. See you Sunday." Hugh was obviously pleased, but he didn't even think to ask how I was doing. I hung up the phone and looked at the monitor again, but the formulas that had just seemed so clear were now blurring before my eyes. The conversation with my son, as always, had left an unpleasant residue. Hugh had never been interested in my work, considering it something abstract and useless. Counting stars was what he'd called my profession since I was a teenager. Neptune, sensing the change in my mood, jumped down from his chair and rubbed against my legs. "It's okay, buddy." I leaned over and scratched the cat behind the ear. "Just old memories." Memories. They came in a wave of Lydia, my wife who had passed away 5 years ago. "You're a good man, Quentin," she said then, packing her suitcase. "But you don't live on this planet. Your home is among the stars, and I'm tired of being married to a man who only notices me when I'm blocking the computer screen." She left for the owner of a construction firm, a real man, as she put it. A man who, she said, was doing something real, not chasing ghosts in space. It hurt, but I couldn't blame Lydia. She had indeed lived 30 years in the shadow of my work, my research, my endless calculations. After Lydia left, I sold our big house in downtown Moore and bought this modest little house in the country, and also a small one-bedroom apartment in the city, which I offered to my son almost immediately. Hugh and Tamsin were just about to take out a mortgage, and I decided to help. Right now, they were paying me a token amount 10 times less than the market rent, but even that Tamsin thought it was excessive. "You're not going to spend that money anyway," she said. "What do you need it for? On new stars?" I shook my head, pushing the unpleasant thoughts away, and focused on work again. By 6 p.m. I had finished my preliminary calculations and sent a request to test my hypothesis to a colleague at the California Institute of Technology. At 8, I received a new data package from the observatory and plunged into analyzing it. It was not until 12:30 at night that I got off the computer. My eyes were sore, my back was stiff, but I had a slight smile on my lips. Preliminary results showed that my theory had a right to exist. Of course, there was still a lot of work to be done, additional checks, parameter adjustments, but the first step had been taken. "Neptune," I called the cat, which had long ago moved to the couch and slept peacefully, curled up in a ball. "Let's go to bed." I shut down the computer, checked that the door was locked, and turned off the lights in the office. Tomorrow was a new day, new calculations, new discoveries, and Sunday was family dinner at Hugh and Tamsin's. I tried not to think about it as I went to bed. Neptune jumped up next to me and settled down at my feet, purring softly. That sound always soothed me. At least there was someone in this little house who appreciated my presence. Under the quiet purring of the cat, I closed my eyes and fell into a dream where there were no hurtful words of my ex-wife, no condescending looks of my son, but only endless expanses of space waiting for their explorer. My last thought before going to sleep was about the apartment in Moore. I'd never considered evicting my son and his family, despite Tamsin's barbs. But sometimes, in moments of weakness, I wondered, what if I'd found the strength to fight back? What if I'd just taken the keys and said I'd had enough? I stood in front of a familiar door on the 3rd floor and mentally prepared myself for the evening ahead. A gift-wrapped bottle of rare whiskey tugged my hand away, reminding me of another small surrender. Before pressing the bell, I took a deep breath, as if before diving into icy water. The sign that read Aldrich Family on the door always gave me mixed feelings. It was my last name, my apartment, but I felt like a stranger here. The door swung open before I could ring the bell. Hugh, my only son, stood on the doorstep with the phone wedged between his ear and shoulder. "Yes, of course, Marco. No problem. We'll discuss it on Monday," he said into the receiver. When he saw me, he nodded and gestured for me to come in without interrupting the conversation. I walked into the hallway, cramped because of the huge closet Tamsin had bought last year. Real oak, not that Swedish fake she had boasted at the time, though even I, far from carpentry, could see that it was a common imitation. Hugh finished talking and finally looked at me. "Hi, Dad. You're just in time." No hug, no pat on the shoulder. My son grew up to be a tall, shouldering man with a square jaw and a confident look. Outwardly, he resembled my late mother, but his character was completely Lydia's. Practical, down to earth, with a slight disdain for anything you couldn't touch with your hands or put in the bank. "I brought the whiskey you asked for." I held out the bottle. "Oh, good." Hugh perked up, taking the gift. "Marco is my new boss. He likes this kind of thing. It'll be good for the corporate party next week." I didn't comment on the fact that the expensive whiskey given to me by a student would now be used to impress some manager. After all, who cared? I wasn't drinking anyway. From the kitchen came voices and laughter. As I entered, I saw Tamsin fussing at the stove and 2 of her co-workers, women about her age, with similar haircuts and equally bright manicures. "Ah, Professor," Tamsin exclaimed when she saw me. "Finally, girls, I'd like you to meet Hugh's father, Quentin. He's a professor of astrophysics," she said my title with a slight irony, as if she were imagining a magician or a fortune-teller. "Hello," I nodded, shaking her outstretched hands. "Happy birthday, Tamsin." "Oh, thank you. 42 is a scary number, isn't it?" She sighed theatrically. "But it's a lot scarier than yours," she added with a smile, and her friends giggled. I didn't say anything. At 76, you don't take offense to age jokes. "The boys are in their room," Tamsin said, waving toward the hallway. "Hugh, show your father what we've done to the parlor." The living room, once simple and functional, was now cluttered with bulky furniture that made the already small room even smaller. The walls, previously white, were covered with large patterned wallpaper. "It's not bad, is it?" Hugh asked with a touch of pride. "It's Italian wallpaper, ordered online." "Interesting," I said neutrally. "Come on, Dad, I can see you don't like it." Hugh grinned. "Too bright for your scientific eye?" "It's not about brightness. It's just—" I hesitated, searching for words. In a small room, a large pattern can make it feel cramped. "It's the latest trend," Hugh said. Tamsin had consulted with a designer from their network office. I nodded, deciding not to continue this pointless argument. After all, although I technically owned the apartment, they lived there. Hugh took me further, showing me the new appliances in the kitchen and the plans for replacing the windows. And in the hallway, we're thinking of knocking down a wall to make a studio, he said, as if he were a homeowner deciding the fate of his property. Tear down the wall? I questioned him, but it's a load-bearing structure. We'll just put up a column, Hugh said. The Bransons have it on the second floor, and the house is still standing. I wanted to explain that differences in layout can be critical, that every building has its own structural logic, but I stopped myself. What was the point? Hugh always thought my remarks were nerdy. Grandfather! A voice suddenly came from down the hall. Ashton, the youngest grandson, peered out of the door of his room. In his 12, he was a skinny, long-legged boy with my gray eyes, the only thing he had inherited from me. Hello, Ashton, I smiled, genuinely happy to see him. Dad, can I show Grandpa my new cell phone? Ashton asked Hugh. Make it quick. It'll be lunchtime soon, he nodded. The boy's room was filled with computer equipment, game consoles, and posters of superheroes. George, the oldest grandson, sat with his headphones on in front of the computer and only nodded, not even turning in my direction. Look, Grandpa! Ashton held out a thin black rectangle to me. The latest model with artificial intelligence and 64 gigabytes of memory. Impressive, I smiled, twirling the gadget in my hands. When I was your age, computers took up entire rooms and had less power than this thing. Really? Ashton's eyes widened in surprise. What did you do on them? Scientific calculations, mostly. I remember when we used to load the punch cards. Perfo what? Ashton asked, perplexed. Cardboard cards with holes in them. Each hole. Grandpa's talking about his antiquities again, George snorted, keeping his headphones on. Ashton, don't start with him or he won't shut up until tonight. I shut up, feeling a familiar mixture of resentment and frustration. Once, 10 years ago, George had listened with interest to my stories about stars and black holes. Now the 15-year-old thought I was an old bore. Never mind, I smiled at Ashton. Why don't you tell me about school? Ashton started to tell me about his classes, but quickly drifted into a description of a new computer game. I nodded, pretending to understand all those terms, skins, donations, character upgrades. In truth, virtual worlds were as much of a mystery to me as quantum physics is to most people. Lunch! Tamsin's voice came from the kitchen, interrupting our conversation. The table in the living room was set for 7. In addition to the hosts and me, there were 2 of Tamsin's co-workers and her brother Norman, a heavy-set man with a perpetually red face who worked as head of security at the same supermarket. He shook my hand as forcefully as if he wanted to prove his physical superiority. What's up, Professor? Still counting your stars? He asked with a loud laugh, taking the seat next to me. Not exactly, I answered. Rather, analyzing the data on... Sit down, Tamsin interrupted, bringing in a plate of roast meat. Cooking isn't my strong suit, but I did my best for my birthday. The dinner was a raucous affair, with Tamsin at the center of it all. Her ringing laughter, her stories about work, her jokes, everything revolved around her. I sat mechanically absorbing my food and nodding occasionally when it seemed appropriate. And then I say to this supplier, either you reduce your price by 15%, or we'll take the product from your competitors, said Tamsin. You should have seen his face. Half an hour later he called back with a new offer. My girl knows how to do business, Norman said proudly, patting his sister on the shoulder. I looked at Hugh. He was smiling, looking at his wife with genuine admiration. My son had always appreciated practicality and acumen, the ability to work things out. That's why he had fallen in love with Tamsin when they met at a party at a mutual friend's house 15 years ago. Her directness, her energy, her ambition, it all seemed so alive and real compared to the abstract world of formulas in which I lived. "And you, Quentin," one of Tamsin's friends suddenly turned to me. "What are you working on now?" There was an awkward pause. I rarely receive such questions in this house. "I'm studying quantum fluctuations in super-dense regions of space," I answered. "It may help us better understand the nature of dark matter." "Dark matter?" questioned the woman with slight confusion. "It's a hypothetical form of matter that doesn't emit or interact with electromagnetic radiation," I began to explain. "It makes up about 27% of the mass energy of the observable universe, but we still—" "God, how difficult!" Tamsin's other friend laughed. "What good is that to ordinary people?" Before I could answer, Norman intervened. "None!" He laughed loudly. "If you ask me, it's just a way for smart people to get grants and not do any real work." "Norman!" Tamsin jokingly reprimanded him, but it was obvious that her brother's remark amused her. "Why?" he continued. "I keep hundreds of people safe every day. Hugh builds houses where families live. Tamsin organizes grocery deliveries to an entire neighborhood. And what's your dark matter for regular people?" I could explain that basic science is the foundation of technological advancement, that without theoretical physics, there would be no computers, no smartphones, not even electricity in their homes. That understanding the laws of the universe is not a luxury, but a necessity for the development of civilization. But I have long ago learned not to enter into such arguments with people for whom value is measured only by immediate practical utility. "Science expands the horizons of human knowledge," I said briefly. "Sometimes the practical applications come later, sometimes immediately." "Dad was always an idealist," Hugh interjected with a slight smile. "When I was a kid, I remember asking him to help me fix my bicycle, and he explained the laws of mechanics to me instead." Everyone laughed, and I forced myself to smile too, though I felt a pang of pain inside. Hugh was distorting reality. I always took the time to help him with the practical stuff. Yes, I explained the operating principles, but I never refused to help. After the main course, Tamsin brought out a large cake and everyone sang "Happy Birthday." I joined in, trying not to fake it. "By the way, father-in-law," Tamsin said to me as she cut the cake, "Hugh and I have decided to start renovations next month. We're finally going to renovate this old apartment." "Yeah, I heard," I nodded. Hugh was talking about tearing down the wall. "Not only that," Tamsin continued excitedly, "we're going to completely redo the layout, change all the plumbing, the wiring, but that's a lot of work," I said cautiously. "Maybe we should consult with an architect about the load-bearing structures." "Come on, Dad," Hugh dismissed me. "I talked to the guys at work and they explained everything. We can do it ourselves, so why waste money on some consultants?" "Besides," Tamsin added, handing me a plate of cake, "it's not like we need your permission. We live here, so it's up to us." I froze with fork in hand. Technically, I owned the apartment. I rented it out to my son and daughter-in-law for a nominal fee, well below market value. Of course, I never intended to evict them or sell the place, but I still had the formal right to dispose of the property. "Legally, it's my property," I said quietly. "Any structural changes would have to be approved by the owner." There was an awkward silence around the table. Tamsin and Hugh exchanged glances. "Oh, here we go," Tamsin snorted. "Every time we want to change something, you bring up your legal rights. And when we have to fix the roof or replace the pipes, it's our problem." "I paid for the roof last year," I reminded him. "Because that's your responsibility as an owner," Tamsin countered. "You get rent from us." "Receive" was a gross exaggeration. The amount they deposited into my account each month barely covered the utilities. "I think we can work something out," I said conciliatorily. "I'd just like to see the work plan to make sure it's safe." "A work plan?" Tamsin mocked. rolling her eyes. "You always make everything so complicated. The world isn't about formulas and plans, Professor. Sometimes you just have to act, not calculate every step." "Exactly," said Norman. "Life is for the living, not for those who count the stars." There was laughter again, and I felt a muffled irritation growing inside me. All my life I had heard such remarks from people who did not understand and did not want to understand the value of theoretical knowledge. For them, I was a crank, detached from reality, although it was thanks to such cranks that mankind moved forward. "Well, enough business," Hugh intervened, obviously trying to lighten the mood. "Let's drink to the birthday girl." Everyone raised their glasses. I had a glass of apple juice. I hadn't had alcohol in years because of my blood pressure problems. The rest of the evening passed in conversations about work, about some common acquaintances, about vacation plans. I was mostly silent, occasionally inserting polite comments. Ashton tried to get my attention a few times, showing me new games on his phone, but he quickly lost interest and went back to his electronic entertainment. Around 9 p.m., I decided I had done my social duty and could head home. After saying goodbye to everyone and congratulating Tamsin once again, I walked out onto the landing. Hugh walked me to the door. "Dad, about the renovation," he started. "We can discuss it later," I replied. "Just show me the plans when they're ready." Hugh nodded, but I could see by the look on his face that they weren't going to show me any plans. They're going to do it their way, as they always do. And I would give in, as always, because the alternative, open conflict, seemed even worse. "Take care of yourself," Hugh said formally, "and don't stay up too late doing your calculations." I nodded and headed for the stairs. There was laughter outside the door again. Life went on without me, more alive, more real in their way. The 2 weeks after Tamsin's birthday flew by. I was immersed in my work, hardly leaving the house except for occasional trips to get groceries. New data from the observatory confirmed my hypothesis, and I spent countless hours analyzing the results and tweaking the mathematical model. Neptune seemed to be the only living thing capable of pulling me out of my trance by demanding food or attention. The call from Hugh caught me off guard. Usually after our meetings, he'd take a few weeks before he remembered I existed again. "Dad, we're having a family dinner on Sunday," he said without preamble. "It's no big deal. Just Tamsin wants to celebrate a promotion." "A promotion?" I asked, trying to remember what else she could have been at her supermarket. "She's been promoted to regional director." Hugh's voice was full of pride. "She'll be in charge of all the stores in our district. A pay raise, a company car, the whole package." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. No matter what I thought of Tamsin, I couldn't help but recognize her business acumen and work ethic. "So, you'll be there?" 2 o'clock, as usual. I thought for a moment. The last meeting had left an unpleasant residue, and part of me wanted to find a polite excuse to say no. But on the other hand, I realized it would only increase the distance between me and my son. "Of course I will," I agreed. "Great. Hugh hesitated. "Tamsin would like you to wear a suit. Her new boss and his wife will be there." I cringed. My only decent suit was hanging in my closet from a coworker's funeral 3 years ago. "Okay," I said. "Can I get you anything?" "No, I don't need anything. Everything's already organized." After the call, I sat staring out the window for a long time. Neptune jumped into my lap, demanding attention. I absent-mindedly stroked his thick fur, pondering the strange zigzags of fate. Who would have thought 30 years ago that a modest girl from the village, selling vegetables at the market, would become a regional director of a supermarket chain, and a respected professor of astrophysics with a worldwide reputation would be perceived as a cranky old man, disconnected from reality? On Sunday, I shaved thoroughly, put on a fresh shirt, and pulled my suit out of the closet. It hung looser than before. I'd lost a few more pounds in the last year. Tying my tie, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Gray hair, deep wrinkles, thin-rimmed glasses. I looked exactly like the venerable professor from the old movies. The thought made me smile involuntarily. "So, Neptune, do you think I'll impress my sister-in-law's important boss?" I asked the cat, who was watching me from the couch. Neptune blinked and turned away, clearly not thinking the question was worthy of an answer. The bus ride took about 40 minutes. I could have taken a cab, but public transportation gave me the opportunity to people watch out of town. In my solitary life, such moments of social interaction, albeit passive, were rare. As I approached my son's house, I noticed an unfamiliar, expensive car parked out front. Apparently, Boss Tamsin had already arrived. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the upcoming social ordeal, and pressed the bell button. The door was opened by Ashton, dressed in a strict shirt and pants that made him look like a small clerk. "Hello, Grandpa," he smiled. "Mom said to behave formally because important people are here." "I understand." I nodded, taking off my coat. "So, how does it feel to be formal?" "It's boring," Ashton grinned. "You can't play phone at your desk and you have to say, 'Yes, sir,' and 'No, sir.'" I suppressed a smile and followed my grandson into the living room. The room was meticulously cleaned, with a white tablecloth on the table and the best dinnerware I had once given Hugh and Tamsin for their wedding. In the center of the room stood Tamsin in an elegant navy blue dress and Hugh in a suit, talking to a middle-aged couple. "There's my father-in-law," Tamsin exclaimed when she saw me. "Quentin, I'd like you to meet Mr. Baxter, the CEO of our chain, and his wife Elaine." I shook hands with a tall man with a shrewd eye and nodded easily to his wife, an elegant woman with impeccable hair. "Pleased to meet you," I said. "Congratulations on your company's success." "Likewise, Professor," Mr. Baxter replied with mild interest. "Did Tamsin mention that you're a scientist?" "Astrophysicist," I nodded. "Retired now, but still doing research." "How interesting," Mrs. Baxter perked up. "I've always been intrigued by space. I recently read about black holes." "Oh, don't start questioning him," Tamsin interjected with a strained smile. "Otherwise we won't have dinner until tonight. The professor can talk for hours about his theories." I noticed Mrs. Baxter's face tense up a little at this impudence, but she smiled politely and said nothing. "George, Ashton, help your mother with the serving," Hugh commanded, and the boys went obediently into the kitchen. Dinner began in an atmosphere of strained formality. Tamsin bustled about, trying to impress the boss and his wife. She was serving gourmet food that she clearly hadn't prepared herself. I noticed the logo of a well-known catering service on one of the packages in the kitchen. The conversation revolved around work, the company's expansion plans, and new marketing strategies. I was mostly silent, only occasionally inserting polite comments. Mr. Baxter appeared to be a shallow man with a broad outlook, and I caught myself thinking that, under different circumstances, we might have had an interesting conversation. After the main course, Tamsin got up to fetch dessert and returned with an impressive tiered cake. "It looks delicious," Mrs. Baxter remarked. "I had it specially ordered from the best pastry chef in town," Tamsin said proudly. "In our family, special occasions are always celebrated to the highest standards." "Speaking of family," Mr. Baxter turned to me. "Professor, you must be proud of your daughter-in-law's accomplishments, right?" Before I could answer, Tamsin laughed, too loudly, too feignedly. "Oh, I don't think my father-in-law even knows what I do. For a man who has spent his life in an ivory tower, business seems down to earth and unworthy of attention." I saw Hugh wince slightly, even he thought it was a bit excessive. "On the contrary," I replied calmly. "I've always respected practical skills and business acumen. It's just that my interests lie in a different field." "An area that no one wants," Tamsin said, cutting the cake. "Frankly, Mr. Baxter, I've never understood why you'd waste your life studying stars that no one will ever see. So they found another black hole. So what? How does that help ordinary people? Mrs. Baxter looked confused and her husband looked interested, as if he were observing a social experiment. Basic science drives progress, I replied. Without theoretical physics, there would be no computers, no satellites, not even electricity as we know it today. Oh, of course, Tamsin rolled her eyes. The lecture is about to start. It's always like this. You ask a simple question, and you get a whole dissertation. The boys at the table fell silent, clearly sensing the tension building. Hugh coughed nervously, trying to change the subject. Mr. Baxter, you mentioned a new project in the Eastern District, but Tamsin apparently decided not to stop. You know what's ironic? She turned to the Baxters, ignoring her husband's attempt to deflect the conversation. The person who's supposedly studying the universe is completely oblivious to what's happening right in front of his nose. My mother-in-law couldn't stand 30 years of such a marriage and ran away. I understand her perfectly. There was a heavy silence at the table. Mrs. Baxter looked frankly shocked, her husband awkwardly interested, like a spectator who had accidentally stumbled into a family quarrel. Hugh's face grew pale. Tamsin, he said quietly, perhaps we shouldn't. Why? She turned to her husband. I'm telling it like it is. Your father spent his life chasing ghosts in space, and as a result, he's alone. With no wife, a son who sees him once a month out of a sense of duty, and grandchildren who think he's a strange old man. And now he sits in his cabin, talking to his cat and thinking he's making great discoveries that nobody wants. I stared at my plate, feeling every word hit like a physical blow. All my life I had tried not to react to such outbursts, considering them a sign of ignorance or misunderstanding. But now, in the presence of strangers, this stream of bile was especially humiliating. Basically, who is he? Tamsin continued, getting into a frenzy. Nobody. A man who has wasted his life on formulas and theories that no one understands and that no one wants. Even the apartment we live in, he bought not because of his stars, but because he inherited it from his parents. What has he done in his life that is real, tangible? Nothing. I slowly put down my fork. Something inside me, some dam holding back years of quiet humility, suddenly collapsed. I felt a strange calmness spreading through my body, the kind of calm that people are said to feel in moments of extreme danger or before making momentous decisions. You know, Tamsin, I said softly, but everyone at the table was instantly quiet. You're right about one thing. This apartment was indeed bought with the money I inherited, but that doesn't negate the fact that it belongs to me. I got up from the table and, taking my time, walked over to the counter in the hallway where Tamsin usually left her purse. I pulled out a bunch of keys with a small purse keychain, a gift from Hugh for my wife's last birthday. Returning to the table, I placed the keys next to the cake. I turned a blind eye to your neglect for a long time. I thought I had to put up with the insults for Hugh and the grandchildren, but there are limits. What are you doing? Tamsin looked at me with a puzzled expression. Taking the keys to my apartment, I said calmly. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Or, if you prefer, you can buy it back at market value. There was absolute silence in the room. Tamsin sat with her mouth hanging open, clearly not believing her ears. Hugh looked as if he had been kicked in the butt. The boys looked from me to their parents in bewilderment. Dad, you can't, Hugh started. I can, I interrupted him firmly. Legally, it's my property, and I have every right to use it as I see fit. Good luck finding a new place to live. I turned to the Baxters, who looked completely stunned. I apologized for the scene. It was a pleasure to meet you. Tamsin finally found her voice. I want my keys back now. She jumped up, her face red with anger and humiliation. You have no right. I do. I calmly put the keys in my pocket. This house belongs to me. You only live here because I let you. Now I don't anymore. You can't kick us out. Tamsin went on a screaming rampage. We have a contract, a symbolic lease with terms I can change at any time, I replied. Read the contract carefully. I never thought I'd have to use this clause, but you left me no choice. With these words, I headed for the exit, feeling the abyss opening up behind me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Tamsin gulping for air like a beached fish, Hugh jumping up from his seat but not knowing what to say or do. As I put on my coat in the hallway, I heard an explosion of voices in the living room. Tamsin's incredulous exclamation, Hugh's attempts to reassure his guests, Mr. Baxter's awkward phrases that perhaps they should leave. I stepped outside. The evening sky was surprisingly clear, with the first glimmers of stars. Somewhere out there, in the endless expanse of space, supernovae were exploding and dying. Black holes were consuming matter, galaxies were colliding, and new worlds were being born. And here, on a small planet in a mediocre solar system, an elderly astrophysicist had just changed the orbit of his quiet life. And the consequences of that change were as unpredictable as quantum fluctuations in a singularity. I took a deep breath of the cold evening air and strolled toward the bus stop, feeling strangely light. For the first time in many years, I was not acting out of inertia, out of duty or habit, but out of an impulse coming from the very depths of my being. And strangely enough, it felt right. I got home about 9 o'clock at night. The house greeted me with silence and darkness. Neptune immediately materialized from the shadows and rubbed against my legs, demanding attention and food. I turned on the light, threw my coat on the couch, and headed into the kitchen to feed the cat. "What a night, buddy," I said to Neptune as I poured the food into his bowl. "I think I just burned all my bridges." The cat looked at me with his amber eyes as if he understood the gravity of the situation, and then he began to eat. I poured myself some tea and sat down at the table, trying to get my thoughts together. My hands were shaking slightly, but overall I felt surprisingly calm. A strange peacefulness, like after solving a particularly difficult math problem. Tamsin's keys were on the table in front of me, a small bundle with a keychain in the shape of a designer purse. I never thought I'd have to use the early termination clause in the contract. When my lawyer insisted on including it, I only waved it off, considering it an unnecessary formality. "This is my son," I said at the time. "Why take such precautions?" The phone rang as I was finishing my tea. Sure enough, it was Hugh. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. "Dad, are you out of your mind?" My son's voice sounded both angry and confused. "What was that? What did you do?" "I just took the keys to my apartment," I answered calmly. "In front of my superiors, in front of Tamsin's boss. Do you realize what you did?" His voice grew panicky. "You've embarrassed us." Tamsin's hysterical. The Baxters left in total shock. "This could cost her a promotion. And insulting me in front of your superiors is perfectly normal," I said bitterly. "She was just kidding. You take everything too personally." I covered my eyes. Of course, Hugh saw nothing offensive in his wife's words. To him, it was just a joke, a light teasing of his old father. He had never realized how deeply words could hurt. Calling a man a nobody is no joke, Hugh. Saying my life has been wasted is no joke. "All right, she was wrong," he said in a pleading tone. "But kicking us out of the apartment? Really? Where are we going to live? Have you thought about the kids?" "You have 30 days to find a new place to live," I said. "Or you can buy the apartment. I'm even willing to offer below market value." "Where would we get that kind of money?" Hugh exclaimed. "Tamsin just got a promotion. We have car loans, the boy's education." "It's not my problem," I said, saying words I would never have said to my son before. 30 days, Hugh. This is my final decision." "Dad, you can't do this to us. We're your family." "Family?" I grinned wickedly. "Family is about respecting each other. When they take an interest in each other's lives, when they don't consider each other's hobbies and work meaningless. We haven't been family for a long time, Hugh. We're just people bound by DNA and uncomfortable obligations." There was a heavy pause in the receiver. Then Hugh spoke in a different tone, stiff and official. "I'll talk to a lawyer. I'm sure we can challenge your decision. Please." I shrugged, though he couldn't see it. "The contract is well drawn up, but you can try." "You'll regret it," I heard the threat in my son's voice. "Do you think you'll be happy there alone with the cat? Let's see how you sing when you get sick or need help." "Good night, Hugh." I hung up without waiting for an answer. Neptune jumped into my lap as if sensing my condition. I stroked him absent-mindedly as the fragments of the conversation flashed through my mind. Hugh was right, I was alone. But had it ever been otherwise? Had my son ever taken a real interest in my life? Wasn't I lonely even when surrounded by family? That night I slept surprisingly soundly. No nightmares, no waking up in a cold sweat. In the morning, I woke up feeling strangely light, as if I'd lifted an invisible weight off my shoulders that I'd been carrying for years. I ate breakfast, fed Neptune, and sat down at my computer, ready to get to work. The data from the observatory was waiting for me to analyze. I opened the files and dove headfirst into the calculations. Numbers and formulas have always made more sense to me than human emotion. There's no room for resentment or misunderstanding in equations. They are either right or wrong. They have an honesty that is sorely lacking in human relationships. I worked for hours on end, forgetting about time and yesterday's conflict. My theory about the effect of dark matter on quantum entanglement was finding more and more support in the data I was receiving. If I was right, it could be a significant step forward in understanding the structure of the universe. The phone rang several times, but I didn't pick up. I knew it was either Hugh with new accusations or Tamsin with threats. What I needed now was clarity of thought, not emotional storms. Only toward evening, when my stomach reminded me of itself with an insistent rumbling, did I tear myself away from the computer and prepare a simple dinner of scrambled eggs and toast. Neptune waited patiently for his portion, sitting in the chair across from me and watching me with unblinking eyes. "You know," I said to the cat as I cut the omelet, "I think my calculations are right. If so, it might explain some of the anomalies in the relic radiation that no one has been able to explain before." Neptune blinked as if agreeing with my conclusions. "Also," I continued, "I feel different. It's like something's different inside. I don't know if it's good or bad, but—" My thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell. It was sharp, insistent. I tensed up. Visitors were rare in my secluded cottage in the country, especially uninvited ones. Looking out the window, I saw Hugh's car parked at the gate, so he decided to switch from phone threats to a personal visit. I sighed, preparing myself for an unpleasant conversation, and went to open the door. Hugh was standing there, tense and red-rimmed as if he'd been up all night. Behind him, I could see the silhouette of Tamsin in the car. "May I come in?" he asked without greeting. I stepped back silently, letting my son into the house. Hugh glanced around my modest interior, lingering on the walls hung with charts and formulas. "Still in your stars," he hummed, but without the usual irony. More like fatigue. "Tea?" I offered, trying to maintain at least a semblance of hospitality. "No," Hugh shook his head. "I won't be long. I came to talk about the apartment. I told you everything yesterday," I said, pointing to the chair. "But you can sit down." Hugh lowered himself into the chair and I sat down opposite him. There was an awkward pause between us, broken by Neptune, who jumped up on the back of the chair and studied the guest with interest. "Tamsin hasn't slept all night," Hugh began. "She's afraid Baxter will change his mind about her promotion." "I'm sorry about that," I said. "But I didn't start this conflict. She's just a little harsh with her language, you know. It's nothing personal." "Nothing personal?" I shook my head. "Hugh, she called me a nobody. She said my life was a waste. How can it be nothing personal?" You've got it all wrong, Hugh waved his hand. She just meant that you could have done more with your knowledge. Something more practical. Like what? Well, I don't know, he shrugged. Write a popular book. Or come up with something that could be patented, something that makes money. I sighed. Hugh didn't understand. He never understood. Science doesn't always have to have immediate practical benefits. Sometimes it's important just to know, just to understand. When Einstein was working on the theory of relativity, he wasn't thinking about the GPS navigators that would be using his calculations a century later. You see, Hugh seized on my words, even Einstein's theory eventually produced something useful. But that wasn't his goal, I shook my head. He was trying to understand the workings of the universe. So was I. Hugh leaned back in his chair, clearly unwilling to continue the philosophical argument. Dad, let's get back to the point. We can't find a new place to live in 30 days. It's unrealistic, especially on our budget. What about buying an apartment? You know we can't afford it, he frowned, even with your discount. Well, I said, then we'll have to find a place to rent. Are you seriously ready to throw your own son out on the street? Your own grandchildren? I'll give you 30 days. It's not out on the street. Tamsin has a good salary, you have a steady job. You'll find somewhere to live. Hugh stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. You know what Tamsin said? That you've always been like this. Cold, calculating, self-centered. That Mom was right to leave. Those words hurt more than I expected. Lydia did accuse me of selfishness, of not being able to see beyond her formulas and theories, but I had always believed that my relationship with my son was different, that he, at least, understood me better. I gave you an education, I said quietly. I supported all your endeavors. I bought you the apartment you live in for a nominal fee, and you think I think only of myself. Yes, you gave money, Hugh nodded. But where were you when I really needed my father? When I was coming from school competitions? When I was having trouble with my friends? When I was trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life? You were always there. He pointed to the wall of formulas, in your stars and galaxies. I wanted to object, to say that I always made time for my son, that I helped him with his homework, that I took him to parks and museums. But something stopped me. Maybe there was some truth to Hugh's words. Maybe I really wasn't always there when I was needed. Yeah, I tried to be a good father, I said at last. You were a father who fulfilled responsibilities, Hugh replied. You provided, you taught, you gave advice, but you were never really with me. Always somewhere in your thoughts, in your theories. We sat in silence. Neptune jumped off the back of the chair and settled at my feet as if sensing my confusion. And yet, I said, pulling myself together, that doesn't excuse the way you and Tamsin have treated me all these years. The neglect, ridicule, completely ignoring my interests and accomplishments. You're right, Hugh agreed abruptly. We have been unfair, especially Tamsin. But you're not blameless either. Another pause. It was beginning to get dark outside the window. I kept the lights off and the room slowly faded into gloom. What do you want from me, Hugh? I asked bluntly. Do you want me to hand over the keys and everything to stay the same? I want you to give us more time. He looked me straight in the eye. At least 3 months. And I want you to think about what comes next. About our relationship, about your grandchildren. I thought about it. 3 months isn't that long. And Hugh's right. I need to think about the future. Whether I wanted to cut ties with my family completely or whether there was a chance to build something new and healthier. Okay. I nodded. 3 months. But on a condition. What's that? Hugh asked warily. Tamsin has to apologize. In person. And I want you to respect my boundaries. No repairs without my consent. No making fun of my work. And I want to see my grandchildren occasionally, not at noisy family dinners, but in a quiet environment. Hugh pondered my terms. I could see the struggle on his face. "About the apology," he began uncertainly. "It's out of the question," I said firmly. "Either Tamsin admits she was wrong, or you find a new place to live within 30 days. Hugh sighed. "I'll talk to her," he finally said. "But I can't promise she'll agree. You know her temper." "I do," I nodded, "and that's why I'm insisting." Hugh stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said, heading for the door. I walked him to the door. We stood across from each other, father and son, so similar on the outside and so different on the inside. Years of misunderstanding and resentment had created a gulf between us that was not easy to bridge. "You know," Hugh said, already gripping the doorknob, "despite everything, I'm proud of you. Your intelligence, your knowledge. I've just never understood why you couldn't use it for something closer to the earth." "And I've always been proud of you," I replied. "Your practicality, your ability to live in the real world. I just never understood why you couldn't accept that my world was different." Hugh nodded and walked out. I watched him get into his car as he and Tamsin talked briefly about something and then drove off, leaving behind puffs of dust on the dirt road. Back in the house, I turned on the light and sat down at the table. Neptune jumped into my lap, demanding attention. I stroked his thick fur, thinking about the conversation with my son. Maybe Hugh was right, and I hadn't always been a good father. Maybe I'd gotten too deep into my research, not noticing what was going on around me. But that didn't excuse the devaluing criticism to which my work, my interests, my whole life was subjected. And at the same time, something changed after our conversation. For the first time in years, we spoke honestly, without masks or the usual roles. Perhaps it was the first step towards real understanding. I went back to the computer, to my calculations and charts. Work had always been my refuge, my way of structuring a chaotic world. But today, I stared at the screen and thought not only about the dark matter hidden in the depths of space, but also about the invisible energy that connects humans to each other, complex, unpredictable, but just as fundamental to our existence. It was 2 weeks after Hugh's visit. I received neither the promised tomorrow call nor an apology from Tamsin. The silence was more eloquent than any words. They hoped I would cool down and change my mind, that my resolve would turn out to be a momentary flash of anger. What they didn't know was that something had fundamentally changed in me the night I'd taken the keys to the apartment. It was as if there was a new constant in the equation of my life: self-respect. I contacted a realtor and had the apartment that Hugh and his family lived in appraised. Real estate prices in Moore had risen markedly in recent years, and my property was now worth almost double what it had been when I bought it. This was good news. With that kind of money, I could finally realize a project I had long dreamed of: a small private observatory with state-of-the-art equipment for collecting data on cosmic radiation. The realtor, an energetic middle-aged woman named Paige Taft, was surprised to learn that the apartment was being rented to my son. "And you still want to sell it?" she asked me over the phone. "Yes," I replied firmly. "I've already notified the tenants. They have another month and a half to find a new place to live." Paige paused, obviously considering whether to pry into her client's family affairs. "Well, that's your right," she said finally. "It's in a good neighborhood, and it shouldn't be hard to find a buyer, but I'll need to see it." "Of course," I agreed. "I'll let my son know." The conversation with Hugh was short and tense. He took the news of the sale as a betrayal, even though I had given him the opportunity to buy the apartment below market value. "Would you really do that?" I could hear the distrust in his voice. "Put us out on the street?" "I'm giving you plenty of time to find a new place to live," I replied calmly, "and you can always buy the apartment back." "You know we can't afford it," Hugh was almost shouting. "Even with your discount, we don't have that kind of money." "Then you'll have to look for another option." There was a heavy pause. "Tamsin was right," Hugh said at last. You've always thought only of yourself. That's not true, I countered. I've thought about you most of my life, even this apartment I bought for you. But I was tired of being disrespected, tired of my work, my interests, my whole life being considered something frivolous and useless. It's just an apartment, Dad. There was desperation in Hugh's voice. The walls and the ceiling. How can you put it above your family? It's not about the apartment, I said quietly. It's about dignity. It's about respect. When Tamsin is ready to apologize, really, truly, sincerely, then we can talk more. Hugh hung up without saying goodbye. 3 days later, Paige inspected the apartment and began preparing for the sale. Hugh was cold and officious during the inspection. Tamsin defiantly left the house. The boys sat in their room, coming out only to nod grimly at me when they met. Nice apartment, Paige said as we stepped outside. It would be worth even more with a good renovation. But, she hesitated, are you sure you want to sell it? Your son looks, I'm sure, I interrupted. Just do your job. The next 2 weeks were spent preparing the apartment for sale and working on my research paper. The observatory data supported my hypothesis, and I was fully immersed in analyzing the results. Neptune seemed to approve of my scientific endeavors, sitting next to me on the desk for hours, watching my hands on the keyboard. I hadn't heard from Hugh. I tried to call several times to see how the search for a new home was going, but he didn't pick up. I began to worry about my grandchildren, how they were processing this conflict, what they were being told about me. But what could I do? I couldn't back down, swallow another humiliation, and go back to being a comfortable, uncomplaining old man who tolerates any treatment for the sake of family peace. The unexpected knock on the door came around 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. I was working on the final part of the article and was not expecting visitors. When I opened the door, I was surprised to find my youngest grandson, Ashton, on the doorstep. The 12-year-old stood, shuffling from foot to foot with his backpack over his shoulders. Ashton, what are you doing here? Do your parents know you're here? Hi, Grandpa. He smiled weakly. No, I said I was going to a friend's house. I took the bus here. I let my grandson into the house, feeling a mixture of joy at his visit and worry about Hugh and Tamsin's possible reaction. You have to call your parents, I said firmly. They'll be worried. Later, Ashton walked into the living room and looked around curiously. This place is cool, especially the cat. Neptune, as if he knew it was him, strode majestically over to the boy and began sniffing his sneakers. His name is Neptune, I said. He's pretty friendly if he likes you. How's the planet? Ashton asked, gingerly reaching out to the cat. Yeah, like a planet, I smiled, surprised by his interest. I know all the planets, Ashton said proudly. And their satellites, too. I've read about black holes, too. I looked at my grandson in surprise. He had never shown much interest in astronomy at family gatherings. Did he? What do you know about black holes? That they are places in space where the gravity is so strong that even light can't escape, Ashton answered, sitting down on the couch. Neptune immediately jumped in next to him, clearly interested in the new man. And that they have an event horizon, and that time flows differently there. I was impressed. That was a lot of knowledge for a 12-year-old boy. Where did you learn about it? On the internet, Ashton shrugged. And at the library. We have a book called The Universe for Beginners. I've read it 3 times. I sat down next to my grandson, feeling warm inside. All these years I thought that my grandchildren are completely indifferent to science, to my interests, that they, like their parents, consider my work meaningless. But it turns out at least one of them was secretly interested in space. Why didn't you ever say that you were interested in it? I asked. Ashton lowered his eyes. Mom says it's all nonsense, that you should learn something useful that will make you money. And Dad, he's just not interested. A familiar pain stabbed his heart. History was repeating itself. Just as Hugh had once hidden from his classmates that his father was a stargazer nerd, Ashton was now hiding his interest in space from his parents. "You know," I said, putting my hand on my grandson's shoulder, "there's no shame in being interested in the workings of the universe. On the contrary, it is one of the noblest endeavors of the human mind." Ashton looked up at me with a look of hope in his eyes. "Really? My mom says you can't live off the stars." "You can," I smiled. "I did. A lot of other people have too. But that's not even the point. Knowledge doesn't always have to bring immediate benefits. Sometimes it's important just to understand how the world works." We talked for hours. I showed Ashton my calculations, explained the principles of telescopes, told him about the latest discoveries in astrophysics. He listened with such eager attention, with such burning eyes, that I felt like a young teacher again, opening for students the wonderful world of science. "Can I come to see you sometimes?" Ashton asked when it was finally time to call my parents. "So you can tell me about space?" "Sure," I answered, feeling my throat constrict. "I'd be very happy to." The conversation with Hugh was tense. He was furious that Ashton had come to see me without permission and insisted that I send him home in a cab immediately. I didn't argue. The last thing I wanted was to use my grandson as a pawn in our conflict. As I saw Ashton off, I gave him a small astronomy book from my library. "Take it," I said. "It's simple but profound, and if you have any questions, call me anytime." Ashton hugged me for the first time in years and ran to a waiting cab. I watched the car disappear around the corner and felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope. Maybe not all was lost. Maybe there was a chance to build a real relationship with at least one family member. A week later, Paige found a buyer for the apartment. A young couple expecting their firstborn was willing to pay even more than I was asking if the deal went through quickly. I agreed, provided Hugh and his family could stay in the apartment for another month. I called my son to break the news. He took it coldly. "So it's settled," he said in a lifeless voice. "We found an apartment for rent on the eastern outskirts. We'll move in 2 weeks. Hugh," I was silent for a moment, searching for words. "I hope this isn't the end of our relationship. I'm still your father. I'm still your children's grandfather." "You know what's ironic?" There was bitterness in Hugh's voice. "Tamsin really wanted to apologize. She was preparing a speech. She was going to come to you. And then you put the apartment up for sale without even waiting for our response. I felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. Was I wrong? Did I rush into things? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call?" "Why should I?" Hugh grinned bitterly. "You made it clear that your apartment was more important than your family. Well, now it will belong to strangers. Congratulations." He hung up, leaving me confused. I didn't know whether to believe what he said about Tamsin's willingness to apologize. In all my years, I'd never once seen her admit she was wrong or regret what she'd said. But what if this time was different? What if I'd missed my chance for reconciliation? But it was too late. The sale of the apartment was almost finalized. The documents were signed. In a few weeks I would have the money and could start work on my little observatory. It was a lifelong dream, a chance to spend my final years doing something I truly loved. That night I spent a long time working on the final part of my paper on the effects of dark matter on quantum entanglement. The text was coming out good, the arguments compelling. I sent a draft to my former colleague, Professor Lawrence, asking for comments before submitting it to a scientific journal. A few days later, when I had already made edits to Lawrence's comments and sent the paper to the editor, I received an unexpected phone call. The number was unidentifiable, and it was with some apprehension that I picked up the phone. "Professor Aldrich?" It was an unfamiliar male voice. "This is Dr. Evans of the American Astronomical Society. I'm calling about your recent paper on quantum fluctuations in superdense matter. I'm tense. How would they know about my work? The paper hasn't even been peer-reviewed yet. Yeah, that's me. What can I do for you? Professor Lawrence sent us your draft, Dr. Evans explained. I hope you don't mind. The point is that your theory can explain some of the anomalies that we observed in the data from the new telescope. We'd like to invite you to speak at a conference next month. I was stunned. After so many years of working in relative isolation after retirement and estrangement from the academic community, this kind of recognition. It's a great honor, I finally said. Of course I'll come. After the call, I sat still for a long time, contemplating what had happened. Neptune jumped into my lap, demanding attention. I absent-mindedly stroked him, trying to realize that my work, my useless formulas, as Tamsin called them, might have real meaning for science. My gaze fell on a small, framed photograph standing on the edge of the table. The only family photo I had left in view was Hugh with his wife and children against the sea, taken a few years ago during their vacation. They were smiling at the camera, happy, carefree. I hadn't been with them on that trip. I cited work, though really I just felt superfluous. I took the picture in my hands. Despite all the conflicts, all the resentments, this was my family. Not perfect, not always understanding, but mine. And suddenly I realized I didn't want to lose them completely. I decided to call Hugh the next day, tell him I wanted to meet, to talk. Maybe it wasn't too late to find a compromise, to build a new relationship based on mutual respect. I could help them with the down payment on their own place. Not to give them an apartment, but to give them the opportunity to become truly independent. And I could also spend more time with Ashton, encourage his interest in science. Maybe someday he'll follow in my footsteps, or maybe he'd choose a different path as long as it was his own choice, not someone else's idea of usefulness or practicality. The phone rang again. This time I recognized the number. It was Ashton. "Grandpa," his voice sounded excited. "I got an A on my paper about black holes. The teacher said I knew more than what the textbook said." I smiled, feeling warmth spreading through my chest. "Congratulations. I'm very proud of you." "It's because of your book," Ashton said. "Dad said I could come over on Saturday if that's okay. He's bringing me himself." "Hugh's bringing you?" That was unexpected. Perhaps not all the bridges have been burned? "Of course. I'd be delighted," I replied. "Maybe we'll even look at the stars. I have a small telescope." "Cool," Ashton exclaimed. "See you Saturday, Grandpa." I hung up the phone, feeling strangely peaceful. Life went on, despite all the conflicts and disappointments. I had finally learned to assert my dignity, but I also didn't want to cut ties with my family. Perhaps that was the balance I had been missing all these years. Neptune purred in my lap as dusk slowly descended outside my window. The stars, my eternal companions, were beginning to show through in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of space, the processes that I had been trying to understand all my life continued to take place. And here, on Earth, in my own life, changes were also taking place, perhaps no less significant and certainly no less complex.